The invisible law, running your life, whether you believe it or not. There is something shaping your daily experiences right now, silently, consistently, and without asking for your belief. It influences how you react, what you tolerate, and what you repeat. Most people never see it, yet they live inside its consequences. And the moment you become aware of it, change becomes possible. This is where awareness begins to replace autopilot. In psychology, this invisible law is not mystical. It is cognitive conditioning. Your brain learns patterns through repetition, emotional charge, and perceived safety. Over time, these patterns operate automatically, guiding decisions before conscious thought steps in. This is how anxiety loops form, how self-doubt stabilizes, and how identity becomes reinforced without deliberate choice. But neuroscience is clear: awareness disrupts automaticity. When you open yourself to observing these patterns, the prefrontal cortex activates, creating space between stimulus and response. Say this internally: today I notice before I react. Your nervous system is learning that awareness equals safety. This is not about forcing change. It is about recognizing what has been running quietly in the background. As we continue, you will learn how this invisible law operates emotionally, cognitively, and physiologically, and how to work with it rather than against it. Write in the comments, "I am becoming aware of the patterns shaping my life." Before we go deeper, subscribe to this channel for psychology-based guidance that supports emotional safety, clarity of mind, and inner strength. Like this video intentionally. It helps this message reach others who are living on autopilot and signals your commitment to awareness. Share this content with someone who may be ready to open yourself to understanding what has been quietly influencing their life. Most people believe their emotions simply happen to them, but psychology shows something far more confronting and empowering. Emotions follow rules, they obey patterns, and once you see those patterns, you stop being ruled by them. At the core of psychological science is this principle: what you do not consciously feel, your nervous system will express for you. Suppressed emotion does not disappear. It converts into tension, anxiety, irritability, fatigue, or numbness. Cognitive behavioral therapy, affective neuroscience, and trauma-informed models all agree on this point. Awareness is the first intervention. Not control, not positivity. Awareness. From a neuroscientific perspective, the amygdala responds before logic engages. If an emotional signal is labeled as unsafe or overwhelming, the brain learns avoidance. Over time, this creates emotional blind spots, areas you no longer consciously access, yet that silently influence behavior, self-worth, and decision-making. This is how emotional autopilot forms. Here is the shift: emotional awareness restores choice. When you open yourself to noticing sensations, tightness in the chest, shallow breath, mental urgency, the prefrontal cortex begins regulating limbic reactivity. This is not philosophy. It is measurable brain function. Naming an emotion reduces its intensity. Feeling safely interrupts survival loops. Say this with intention: I allow myself to feel without becoming overwhelmed. Your nervous system is learning that emotion does not equal danger. This is mental strength. Not suppression, but regulation. The invisible law becomes clear here. What you can feel, you can influence. What you avoid controls you. Emotional mastery is not dominance. It is contact. The moment awareness replaces resistance, power returns to the system. As we move forward, this awareness becomes the foundation for reframing thought patterns, stabilizing the nervous system, and rebuilding identity with clarity and strength. Write in the comments, "I am building mental strength through emotional awareness." Every thought you repeat is a vote for the reality you experience, not symbolically, neurologically. Your brain does not distinguish between repetition and truth. It strengthens whatever is rehearsed most often. This is how belief systems are built, and how they can be rebuilt. Cognitive psychology shows that thoughts followed by emotional charge wire faster and deeper. Through mechanisms like neuroplasticity and Hebbian learning, repeated cognitive statements become default neural pathways. This is why negative self-talk feels automatic, and why intentional cognitive affirmations, when applied correctly, are not motivational tools but neural training protocols. Beliefs are not opinions, they are conditioned expectations. In cognitive behavioral therapy, reframing is not about replacing bad thoughts with positive ones. It is about installing accurate, regulating, and stabilizing statements that the nervous system can accept as safe and believable. When an affirmation aligns with emotional readiness, the brain does not resist it. It integrates it. This is how belief systems change without internal conflict. Say this clearly, internally or aloud. I'm allowed to think in ways that support stability and strength. Each repetition reduces cognitive threat and increases perceived safety. Your nervous system begins to stand down from constant vigilance. Here is the critical distinction. Affirmations fail when they fight identity. They succeed when they retrain it. Declarative cognition, statements spoken with certainty rather than hope, engages the prefrontal cortex and dampens fear-based loops. Over time, these statements become cognitive defaults, not exercises. The core principle activates here. Beliefs do not respond to force. They respond to repetition paired with regulation. When your thoughts are calm, confident, and consistent, the brain updates its internal model of who you are. This is not self-deception. This is self-programming with intention. Use this daily cognitive anchor. Today, my thoughts move in alignment with clarity, safety, and mental strength. Your system learns what to expect from you and begins to cooperate. As we continue, these reframed belief systems will become the groundwork for stabilizing the nervous system and breaking emotional patterns that no longer serve your growth. Write in the comments, I am reinforcing belief systems that support my mental strength. You already know the pattern before it finishes. The same thought, the same reaction, the same emotional ending. It feels familiar, and familiarity is often mistaken for truth. But repetition is not destiny. It is momentum without interruption. Repetitive mental patterns persist for one primary reason. They are unobserved in real time. When a thought loop runs without awareness, it completes itself automatically. The mind moves fast, emotions follow, behavior confirms the story, and the cycle closes. Not because it is correct, but because it is uninterrupted. Here is the therapeutic reality. Patterns weaken the moment they are seen clearly. You do not break cycles by fighting them. You break them by catching them mid-sequence. The instant you notice this again, the loop loses authority. Awareness introduces friction, and friction slows momentum. This requires determination, not force. Say this internally when the pattern begins. This stops being automatic now. Your system responds to decisiveness, not aggression, clarity. When you open yourself to observing the pattern instead of merging with it, something critical happens. Emotional charge decreases. The thought no longer feels like a command. It becomes information, and information can be redirected. This is the turning point most people miss. The pattern does not need to finish to be broken. Interrupting it halfway is enough. You do not need a new belief yet. You do not need certainty. You only need to refuse unconscious repetition. That refusal is power. Use this cognitive interruption phrase when the loop appears. I choose a different response before this completes. Each interruption weakens the pattern's grip. Consistency replaces intensity. Over time, what once felt inevitable begins to feel optional. The mind learns that repetition is no longer guaranteed, and when repetition is no longer reliable, the pattern dissolves. As we move forward, this break in automaticity will allow deeper integration, where identity, self-worth, and inner strength can stabilize without being hijacked by old loops. Write in the comments, I am interrupting patterns that no longer control me. Mental barriers are not walls. They are conclusions repeated long enough to feel solid. They sound like certainty. They feel like realism. But they are learned limits, not permanent truths. And anything learned can be unlearned. A mental barrier forms when the mind decides, this is as far as I go. Not because it is accurate, but because it once reduced emotional risk. Over time, that decision hardens into identity. This is just who I am. What began as protection becomes confinement. Emotional freedom does not disappear. It gets postponed behind assumptions that are never re-examined. Here is the grounded reality. Barriers persist only while they remain unquestioned. The moment awareness reaches the limit, rigidity softens. You do not need to break through aggressively. You need to see the edge clearly. When you open yourself to noticing where you stop, emotionally, cognitively, relationally, you expose the mechanism, not a flaw. Say this slowly, with firmness. I am allowed to move beyond limits I did not consciously choose. Your nervous system responds to permission more than pressure. This is not rebellion. It is reclamation. Mental blocks often masquerade as logic. I've tried before. That's not realistic. People like me don't do that. These statements feel grounded, but they are rehearsed conclusions. When repeated without review, they operate as invisible restraints. Awareness does not argue with them, it outgrows them. Here is the decisive shift. A barrier only exists at the level of belief, not at the level of capacity. The moment you see that distinction, authority returns to you. Capacity expands with use. Beliefs dissolve with exposure. And identity updates when behavior proves the mind wrong. Use this grounding declaration when resistance appears. I step forward even while doubt remains. Confidence is not required. Movement is. As these barriers loosen, emotional freedom becomes practical, not theoretical. You no longer wait to feel ready. You act from clarity, and readiness follows. This is how self-worth stabilizes, not through affirmation alone, but through evidence. What comes next is integration, where these insights consolidate into inner strength that no longer collapses under pressure. Write in the comments. I am moving beyond mental blocks with clarity and steadiness. Insight is not a sudden realization. It is a gradual alignment. It arrives quietly, without urgency or force. It feels like clarity rather than intensity. And once present, it begins guiding decisions almost effortlessly. This is the function of mental awareness. Psychological insight emerges when cognition, emotion, and perception synchronize. In metacognitive models, this is described as thinking about thinking. The capacity to observe mental processes without becoming absorbed by them. When awareness stabilizes at this level, reactions slow, choices widen, and inner strength becomes practical, not dramatic, reliable. Neuroscience supports this shift. Insightful awareness engages integrative brain networks that connect emotional processing with executive function. This allows information to move freely instead of fragmenting into impulse, avoidance, or overthinking. The mind stops reacting to fragments and starts responding to the whole picture. This is where integration occurs, not by adding more techniques, but by seeing clearly what is already happening. When you open yourself to observing your inner experience without judgment, the system recalibrates. Thoughts become signals, not commands. Emotions become data, not threats. Patterns are recognized early before escalation. This is mental clarity. Not the absence of thought, but the presence of perspective. Say this gently without emphasis. I see my inner world clearly, and I choose consciously. This statement reinforces awareness without pressure. The nervous system remains regulated while cognition stays engaged. Insight does not demand change. It naturally guides it. From an educational perspective, insight-based awareness strengthens self-trust. When decisions are informed by observation rather than reactivity, confidence stabilizes. You no longer need certainty to move forward. Clarity becomes enough. Inner strength, then, is not forceful determination. It is coherence. Here is what matters most. Insight is cumulative. Each moment of awareness builds on the last. No single realization carries the weight. Consistency does. This is why clarity feels brighter over time, not because life simplifies, but because perception sharpens. As integration continues, effort decreases. You respond instead of brace. You adjust instead of resist, and your internal guidance becomes dependable. Write in the comments, I am choosing clarity through awareness and insight. Inner conflict is not weakness. It is divided intention. One part of you wants movement, another wants safety. Both believe they are protecting you, and until they are heard together, progress feels unstable. Resolution begins with courage, not control. Psychology frames internal conflict as competing cognitive emotional goals. When opposing motivations activate simultaneously, the nervous system remains on alert, draining clarity and energy. Research on self-regulation and integrative therapies shows that progress accelerates when conflict is resolved through coherence, not suppression. Alignment calms the system. Fragmentation agitates it. Here is the firm truth. You do not need to eliminate any part of yourself to move forward. You need integration. When you open yourself to acknowledging both fear and intention, the brain stops signaling threat, choice returns, energy consolidates. Say this with courage. I allow my inner parts to work together, not against each other. This statement reduces internal resistance and increases psychological safety. Cooperation replaces struggle. The victory is this: when inner conflict resolves, effort drops dramatically. You no longer push, you proceed. Decisions feel cleaner. Emotions stabilize. Progress becomes visible because it is no longer contested internally. This is psychological victory, not over yourself, but with yourself. Now, let integration settle. Final therapeutic closing, grounding and integration. As this session completes, notice the steadiness present now. Your nervous system has received signals of cooperation and safety. Inner tension has softened. Mental noise has organized. What once felt like opposition is learning alignment. I affirm that clarity continues beyond this moment, emotional struggle loses urgency, and inner strength stabilizes through coherence. You are not forcing change, you are allowing integration. Carry this grounded awareness forward. When conflict arises, return to observation, permission, and choice. Today, your mind finds safety, your body finds calm, and your path becomes clearer. Write in the comments, I choose psychological victory through inner alignment. Subscribe for continued guidance toward emotional clarity and resilience. Like as an affirmation of integration. Share to support others, resolving their internal conflict with courage. At some point, the mind decides something is impossible. Not unlikely, not difficult, impossible. And once that conclusion forms, effort collapses before it begins. This is not reality speaking. It is conditioning. Psychological impossibilities are not limits of capacity. They are limits of expectation. The mind builds these limits from past failure, emotional overwhelm, or repeated disappointment. Eventually, it stops testing. What once required effort now feels categorically closed. This is how "I can't" replaces "I haven't yet." And over time, the impossible becomes familiar, even comfortable. Here is the critical shift. Impossibility is not a fact. It is a prediction, and predictions can be revised. When you open yourself to questioning what feels permanently blocked, you interrupt the certainty that keeps the barrier intact. The goal is not blind optimism, it is re-exposure. Small, deliberate actions taken despite doubt begin restructuring expectation. The mind does not need proof of success, it needs proof of movement. Say this with conviction: I act even when my mind says this won't work. This statement destabilizes the illusion of impossibility. Action introduces new data, and new data weakens old conclusions. Motivation does not come first, contradiction does. Here is the triumphant truth: the impossible dissolves the moment the mind is forced to update its prediction. One step taken where none was expected is enough, not to win, but to reopen the system. When the brain sees that effort did not result in collapse, the category of impossible fractures. Use this cognitive declaration when resistance peaks: I move forward without needing certainty. Each repetition expands what feels available. Emotional breakthrough is not dramatic, it is cumulative. When you open yourself again and again to acting beyond expectation, something shifts internally. Hope stops being an emotion and becomes a strategy. Momentum replaces hesitation. What once felt unreachable begins to feel unfinished, not forbidden. This is how psychological limits are restructured, not by believing harder, but by moving anyway. Write in the comments, I am stepping beyond what once felt impossible. Subscribe for continued guidance on breaking mental barriers and reclaiming emotional strength. Like as a signal of expectancy and forward movement. Share this message with someone who is ready for an emotional breakthrough. Purpose is not something you suddenly discover. It is something that organizes your attention. When purpose is unclear, energy scatters, motivation weakens, emotions feel busy but unproductive. Clarity restores focus by giving effort a direction to move toward. In psychology, life purpose is defined less as a destination and more as a regulating framework. Research in motivational psychology and meaning-centered models shows that when the mind understands why it is acting, emotional endurance increases and stress tolerance improves. Purpose reduces internal friction. Direction simplifies decision-making. This is why people without clear direction often feel mentally exhausted, even when doing very little. The brain is constantly recalculating without a reference point. Purpose acts as that reference. It does not eliminate difficulty, it justifies effort. From a neuroscientific standpoint, goal-directed clarity strengthens executive functioning. The prefrontal cortex prioritizes relevant stimuli and filters distraction more effectively when actions align with a meaningful objective. Emotional focus improves not because emotions disappear, but because they become contextualized. Here is the key insight. Purpose does not require certainty about the future. It requires commitment to a direction. When you open yourself to defining what matters now, not forever, the system stabilizes. Purpose can be provisional, direction can evolve. What matters is coherence between values and action in the present moment. Say this decisively: I move with intention even as clarity continues to refine. This reinforces direction without rigidity. The nervous system responds well to forward motion paired with flexibility. Purpose also supports emotional regulation. When stress appears, it is no longer interpreted as meaningless strain. It becomes part of a larger trajectory. This reframing reduces emotional overwhelm and increases resilience. Focus sharpens, effort feels cleaner. Psychologically, people with a sense of purpose show higher persistence, better emotional recovery, and stronger self-regulation. Not because life becomes easier, but because it becomes organized. Let this guide you. Direction precedes motivation. You do not wait to feel inspired. You choose alignment, and inspiration follows behavior. As you open yourself to acting in accordance with what matters, contribution, growth, stability, integrity, emotional focus improves naturally. Purpose is not pressure, it is orientation. Write in the comments, I am choosing direction that supports clarity and emotional focus.